This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, welcome to the third in our four-part collection. This is a referendum planning webinar series. This is Julie Fitzgerald, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Guy K-12. Today's webinar is on campaign organization, roles, and responsibility. We are proudly sponsored by Springstead Incorporated and Guy K-12 Geovisual Analytics. Presenting today, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Don Lifto. Dr. Lifto has extensive experience, over 25 years as a superintendent, has literally written the book on referendum planning, and a new version of that book is going to be released shortly. And he's been working in school finance and consulting with school districts for over the past 10 years. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Don Lifto.
Thank you, Julie. I'm happy to be with you again in the third of four in this webinar series focused on campaign organization roles and responsibilities. And what I'll be going through today is providing you with some suggestions from the field in terms of how to organize not only the school district resources, but also how to connect and coordinate with campaign resources. I'm going to begin by talking about the engagement pyramid. This is something that was developed by Groundware and Grassroots Solutions. It's a way of thinking about community organizing and does have some good application for campaign organization if you're planning a school referendum. We'll talk roles and responsibilities, including the school board, administration, staff, and those who get involved in the actual campaign. How to strategize around recruitment of a winning team, and winning team in this context, as I'm talking about that advocacy group. And once you've got your volunteers recruited, how are you going to organize and plan the campaign? So we'll start off by looking at the engagement period I referenced. And in this pyramid, as you can see at the bottom middle, the foundation is labeled low engagement. And if you go to the top of the pyramid, you're looking at high engagement. And then left and right, we're talking about both people and all types of communications from the school district or the campaign. So if you move back down to the bottom again at the foundation, the strategy related to the engagement pyramid is to try to move both your communications and your people from what begins always with low engagement and then moving them up from the bottom to the top to increasingly greater responsibilities and higher levels of engagement. You want your base to be representative of your community, and more than just getting votes for the campaign, using this approach also is a great strategy to increase general support for the district over time. In terms of going through those steps from bottom to top, we start at the bottom with observing. So these are people who may have some interest, they may have some general awareness, but really haven't done anything yet. When you move up to level 2, that's the level of the pyramid which is following, and that can be literally mean following as it relates to social media, Facebook likes, those kinds of things. Interested enough to kind of pay attention to what the district is talking about, what it's contemplating, but not really having done anything yet beyond that casual following. Level 3, we move up one step in the engagement pyramid. I keep doing that, sorry. And we're talking about endorsing. And endorsing is we're interested, we're supportive, we like something, Maybe we do a donation to the campaign, we sign a petition. We're starting to take action and endorsing what the school district is considering moving ahead. Level 4 is we're contributing time, talent, and treasure. We're volunteering. We're signing up to help. We're taking a turn at a booth, giving out information about the proposal that's coming down in a future election. Level 5, owning. Now we're fully invested in the mission. We're a regular contributor. We're deeply involved. We might work on a committee. We might be chair or co-chair of a committee. And then finally, at level 6, the top of the pyramid would be the leader of the overall campaign, maybe a co-chair or a tri-chair of the campaign, and intimately involved and deeply involved in everything related thereto. In terms of goals, when you think about the engagement pyramid, first of all, the district needs to map its human resources at each level of the pyramid. And by mapping human resources, what I'm talking about is understanding what talent is available and where there might be gaps in human resources that will require some additional work to find people or to hire people to help with what needs to get done. We want to expand the number of people involved at each level. And we want to encourage interested individuals and groups to move up the pyramid from low levels to high levels of engagement. Minnesota had a wonderful example of using the engagement pyramid very effectively in 2011. And what that related to was an organization that was formed called Minnesota United for All Families, and it revolved around the issue of gay marriage. And independent from your personal beliefs about that or your political position related to that, I'll give you an example of how effective they were. Within just a few weeks, they had recruited 27,000 volunteers. They'd done 900,000 phone calls and knocked on 400,000 doors. So if you can imagine at the beginning of a campaign on day one where nothing has happened, no one's recruited, nothing is organized. So on day one, we're mapping our human resources. We're thinking about how do we get more people involved in the campaign and then move people up from low to high levels of commitment. This Minnesota United was quite an impressive example of doing that very, very well. So now we're going to go into talking about roles and responsibilities. And this is very important because it isn't unusual for whether it's school board members or volunteers or staff. They get a little confused, a little anxious, sometimes step outside of what should be their role in participating in a referendum for operating technology or issuance of debt. So we'll start thinking about what are some things that school boards can do to play out their particular role. First and foremost, we want to keep the focus on students. Believe it or not, oftentimes when I see literature from school districts talking about the need for a referendum of some sort, it's not unusual that I can go through several paragraphs or several pages and see very little, if any, reference to student needs. So this is really an important fundamental driver that you want everything based on what students need to be successful in your education process. Strategically involve citizens in the development of the plan. So when we talk about citizens, we're talking about the people who are not working for the district, are not on the school board, and figuring out how to involve citizens in this process. Aligning the final proposal with community values and appetite for spending to help avoid opposition. One of the most important things that school districts can and should do in the months leading up to a potential decision to have a referendum is to do a very thorough job of evaluating how the community perceives the needs of the district, and is there alignment or agreement with the proposal that's going to be on the ballot. So for a concrete example, if the school board thinks that what's needed is a new middle school, for example, how do the people in the community feel about that? What percentage of people in the community agree with that? What does it cost? And are people within the community willing to pay for that particular investment? In the webinar series, one of the modules related to testing feasibility of a proposal with a scientific random sample survey, and you can revisit that particular module to get some ideas about how that can be done. Continuing with the school board, delivering a unanimous resolution is very, very important. If you look at the research on how come some districts win referenda and some lose, one of the big drivers of that relates to split school boards. When you have a 4-2 or 5-2 or a 4-3 school board making a decision to put something on the ballot, the vast majority of those proposals fail. So if you can bring your school board along, if you have disagreement on the school board, again, if you can, take more time, and certainly a goal to achieve a unanimous resolution is very important to success. The school board can be fully engaged in the district's informational campaign. Note in that bullet, it doesn't say advocacy campaign, it says informational campaign. Sometimes school board members think that, I can't get involved because I'm on the school board. While different states have different statutes that govern that involvement, I can tell you that in most instances, school board members do not give up their First Amendment rights to free speech just because they are elected to the board. And in almost all states, board members can be involved, at least in the informational campaign, and oftentimes also in the advocacy campaign, as long as they're not using district funds to do so. Which relates to the last bullet, supporting the campaign committee. Now we're talking the advocacy group within the legal parameters of your particular state. Role of administration. One thing that's very important is to start early with a realistic timeline. Oops, pardon me. Secondly, on that timeline, I should back up and say I like to see somewhere between 12 and 18 months in terms of a plan to orchestrate that referendum. And we do have some examples of those long-range plans if someone would be interested in looking at that. Plan strategically and meticulously based on research and best practices. There are hundreds of dissertations on successful referenda and many books that try to summarize some of those for the practitioner. There certainly are some proven strategies that work, and it's important for the school leadership to be aware of those and be prepared to implement them. Again, the administration needs to execute the school district's informational campaign. Once again, that's informational, not advocacy, but provide leadership and support to the campaign committee within the parameters of state law. Knowing when to use experts to help you kind of relates to the engagement pyramid when I was talking about mapping your resources. If you're a small or medium district and don't have a director of communications, for example, you may need to spend some money to get the help you need to communicate at a high level, both in terms of your print, electronic, and social media. Continuing with the role of the administration, demonstrating good stewardship is an important preparation for the administration. I can give you just one example of how that could play out. Sometimes during the summer when I'm working on a referendum project with the district and driving out to meet with the superintendent, it's not unusual to see lots of weeds coming through cracks in the asphalt in the parking lot or up the sides of the building. And that doesn't present a great perspective from the community when it might look like the district isn't taking care of what it already has, and particularly if they're planning a facility project. It's important to have the terrazzo shiny, have the litter picked up, have the grass trimmed, and give the community the impression that you're taking very, very good care of what you already have before you ask them to pay more to invest in other facility needs. Solicit and encourage participation from staff in support of the campaign committee. This is all staff. Teachers are particularly important, but don't forget the custodians and the administrative assistants. They also talk to people after church when people are having coffee or at a play or in the grocery store. You want your staff to be both knowledgeable and supportive of what the campaign committee is doing and what the district is requesting of the community. The role administration also can provide information, support, and resources to the campaign committee within the parameters of state law and school board policies. One example on school board policies, for instance, it's not unusual for campaign committees to want to hand out flyers at a football game, for example. Well, is there anything in your school board policy that would restrict the campaign committee from doing that? So it's important to review your policies and also be aware of your state laws related to those parameters. Reaching out to other constituencies means we can't just rely on parents and interacting with parents. In most school districts, parents only represent about 20% of registered voters living within the district. So clearly, in the vast majority of cases, you have to expand to other constituencies in order to get the support that you need. This is an example of a school district in Minnesota that developed something called Matamidi Generations. And I lived in this school district, and I was also a former superintendent in this district. And as I got older, I magically turned 65 and then automatically qualified for Matamidi Generations. So I get communication from this group once a month, and it provides me with free tickets to events in the district, whether it be a play or a basketball game. They do school tours. They demonstrate new curriculum. In this particular case, in the box over on the right, the Matamidi Generations had set up an opportunity for older adults to find out about the operating levy that was being proposed by the school district. And so this is really a great way to connect with older residents. And the more they're involved and the more they get under the roof and see kids and interact with teachers, the more likely you're going to get a yes vote when that referendum comes forward. Under that bullet at the top, where it talks about Flag Day, I'll just mention one other example of reaching out to other constituencies. In this particular district, for whatever reason, there was kind of a strained relationship between the American Legion Club, the Lions Club, and the district. And a lot of the men at the time who were in the Legion were also in the Lions. So they were just kind of a chippy relationship that had lots of years, and I don't know if anyone really understood all the reasons why the relationship wasn't as good as it should have been. So a group of people sat down around a table and talked about that and generated some ideas about why that might have been the case. And at some point in time, someone threw an idea on the table. And the idea was that the school district historically had not done much of anything on Flag Day. Now, an individual teacher might do something in a particular classroom in one of the schools, but in terms of a district-wide plan or initiative, there's basically nothing that was done. Anticipating that this would be an area of interest to Lions and Legion members, an outreach was made to some leaders within those two groups to see if they'd like to get involved. It started off very modestly with, on Flag Day, we had volunteers from both the Legion and the Lions visiting classrooms, handing out little miniature flags to the students and talking about the history and importance of the flag. A few years later, it grew to landing a helicopter on the grounds of the high school on Flag Day as part of the activities around Flag Day. In this example, what started off as a very small idea developed and grew, became popular. One of the leaders on the Lions Club ended up on the board of directors of the foundation for the school district, and over time it improved that relationship. It got those folks who might have been, for whatever reason, a little bit skeptical about the district into the buildings, into the classrooms, interacting with kids and teachers, and over time was very helpful. So that's an example of reaching out to other constituencies. The caution that I always share at the end of that story when I'm doing training with superintendents or other school leaders is if it was a good idea in the year leading up to your referendum, it better be a good idea after your referendum, or it will be viewed as disingenuous, and long-term you'll probably go backwards rather than forwards with those relationships. In terms of the faculty and staff, certainly we want to solidify primary constituencies, and in that context we're talking about parents. I'll give you one idea how that can be enhanced. A district that I'm aware of developed what it called a 111 plan, 111. And the 111 plan was asking teachers to make one call per day for 1 minute to a student's parents in his or her classroom. So this particular district, I think, had about 300 teachers, and those calls were intended to sound something like this. Mrs. Johnson, hello, this is Bob Wilson, your son Terry's teacher. We had a spelling test today on the States of the Union, and your son was 50 out of 50. Give him a hug when he gets home. Did a great job. So one call per day for 1 minute to one parent. And imagine 300 calls like that each school day. Now, did all 300 of the teachers do it? No. But imagine that half of them did it. Now we're talking about 150 positive calls per day. And certainly over time, that would create goodwill and solidify that primary constituency. The same caution as I commented on earlier, if it's a good idea in the year leading up to a referendum, it better be a good idea after the referendum. Providing extraordinary service, I can give you one example from an administrative point of view. I knew a superintendent of schools who did some training with new superintendents, and one of the things I had access to through that training was what he called the 30-day callback. And with a 30-day callback, how that worked is if the superintendent gets a call from Mrs. Johnson on a particular day and hears that her son was getting bullied and pushed in a mud puddle at the bus stop, that superintendent, and it could be a principal as well, but that superintendent would be on the phone and take down all the key stuff. Where did it happen? When did it happen? The son's name, the parent's name, and normal protocol would be we're going to follow up on that and try to get that solved. And I'm glad you told us about the problem. The 30-day callback is moving ahead in Outlook and putting a task in 30 days after that phone call. And the task would be to call that mother back. And so imagine 30 days later, superintendent calls back and says, Mrs. Johnson, this is Superintendent Wilson. We talked about a month ago. Your son is having trouble at the bus stop. I was just getting back to you to find out if things are going well now. In the the research in the private sector world, they talk about delighting the customer. And certainly this is an example where that mother is very surprised and very pleased to get a call back from the superintendent. She may have interacted with the principal in actually solving the problem, but the superintendent cared enough to call back and see how things were going. I used this over the years many times, and there's a secondary benefit in doing so. Not only do you please the person who was called, but I would say about 1 time out of 4, the problem was not solved. So now you have a second opportunity to fix it that you might not have had otherwise without that callback. So just a couple examples of providing extraordinary service, all with the idea of reinforcing your natural base, making those relationships as strong as they possibly can be. Ask questions and be informed. Similar to what I commented on earlier, you need to have your teachers and other staff understanding the proposal and being able to have a conversation at the grocery store and be informed. And the faculty and staff also can support the campaign committee through contributions of their time, talent, and treasure, as long as it's not during the school day and it's not expending public resources. Some folks refer to this as it's got to be on your time and your dime, not during the normal school day. Campaign committee, this is the advocacy group, is a very easy task. All they have to do is execute the campaign and deliver enough yes votes to win. Of course, we know that while that's the goal, it's not that easy. And so I'm going to go through some strategies and ideas to help you have a more effective campaign committee. When it comes to actually recruiting the campaign, it's important that The district leader, oftentimes the superintendent, be very strategic and hands-on and not laissez-faire. Give you an example of what that could mean. If the superintendent calls for a public meeting at the gym on a particular night to talk about the upcoming referendum for a new middle school, and she or he talks to the group about the importance of having citizens and parents involved in that process, and then turns to the group and says, who would like to be one of the two co-chairs of the campaign committee? And someone raises their hand. That would be an example of the laissez-faire. The hands-on approach would look something like this. You pull a dozen people together, school board members, staff, key community leaders, superintendent, into a conference room, and you start brainstorming who would be the perfect person to be one of the tri-chairs for the Vote Yes for Kids committee. You generate lists of males, you generate lists of females, you focus on age, gender, ethnicity, politics, and at some point in time you've got a list of 25 or 30 males and 25 or 30 females. Then you use some kind of voting process, or everybody gets 5 stickers and they get to put them on the name they think would be perfect. Somehow or another, you prioritize them. You end up with your number one choice for a male, your number one choice for a female, your number one choice for a business person, your number one choice for a retired person. And so you're very, very strategic in trying to figure out who would be a perfect leader for that. The low-hanging fruit reference means once you have your priority list, then you have a conversation about, okay, of our 5 top choices here based on different demographics, who is the one that we think is the most likely to say yes? And that's the one you're going to go after first in terms of getting that volunteer. The triangulation relates to some political, sociological research that says it's more difficult to say no to 2 people than to 1. So you create a triangle. You can imagine meeting somebody at the coffee shop in town, and the 2 of you who are doing the asking are on one side of the table, and the hopeful victim is on the other side. And so the 2 of you talk about the importance of this middle school and ask for that person to step up and accept one of those leadership positions. And using ideal task performer. What that relates to, kind of in combination with the triangulation, is that you should also think about who should be on the other end of the table in terms of those 2 people. It's more difficult to say no to a friend or a coworker or a neighbor than it is to a stranger. So starting back up where I began with the first bullet, strategic is what I've been talking about for the last 5 or 6 minutes, and very, very different than who wants to chair the communication committee, which I certainly would not recommend. Ultimately, as you go through this work, you're trying to get to what some people would call the wow factor. And I'll give you a musical introduction to what that could mean. Now, depending on your age, you may or may not have recognized that theme song or recognize the three names of the movies that you see on this particular slide. But let me just run through them quickly and think about what they have in common. Magnificent Seven. During Gold Rush out west, Denzel Washington leads a hand-selected group of henchmen to rescue the town of Rose Creek from a ruthless band of outlaws. Dirty Dozen. Lee Marvin recruits 12 men off death row to parachute behind enemy lines and disrupt the Germans before D-Day. Ocean's 11. George Clooney handpicks 11 accomplices and pulls off the most daring and dangerous casino heist in history. I'm sure as you listen to me give those brief reviews of these three movies, you notice that they all handpicked a small group, carefully selected in order to get a very, very difficult thing done. Does that sound anything like a school bond referendum or needing a yes vote for more operating money? That's also something that's very difficult to get done. And this strategic approach that I talked about and trying to get the wow factor is that when the dust settles, you have 12, 15 people who are perfectly selected for what needs to get done to get this election passed. So we're matching every campaign task to the attributes and needed volunteers. I oftentimes use finance as an example. Campaigns need money. And if you pick the right person in your community, you need $10,000 for your campaign, she or he will get you that money fairly quickly and fairly easily. You pick the wrong person to raise money for the campaign, and you may never see the money you need to do a good job. So the ideal task performer is picking the right person for every campaign task. Here's a typical organizational chart of what a campaign might look like. In this particular case, as you can see in the blue ovals, we're working with tri-chairs. And there's nothing magic about tri-chairs. It could be co-chairs, but having three rather than two gives you an opportunity to be a little bit more diverse in your leadership. These are the people that are at the top of that engagement pyramid. So, maybe it's a man and a woman for two of them, and the third one is somebody from the business community, or the third one is someone who's retired, or maybe the third one is a former mayor. So it just gives you a little bit more opportunity for diverse leadership. And then around the outside, you see the 6 campaign functions: canvassing, in-reach, outreach, finance, communications, and get out the vote. The 2 in the parentheses for each of those suggest having co-chairs rather than one person chairing communication. There are 2 reasons for that. One is getting back to the engagement pyramid again. One of the goals of the engagement pyramid was getting more people involved, broadening the base. By having co-chairs rather than one chair, you're doubling the number of people involved in your campaign committee. The other reason is that in many, many cases with school districts, your volunteers might be working on their first referendum campaign. And it's a little bit less intimidating if I go to you and say, are you willing to co-chair the communications with Jane Bell? So you have somebody to share that responsibility with. You might be more likely to get that yes vote if the person isn't feeling overwhelmed by having so much responsibility and she or he is the only one as compared to co-chairs. I mentioned the 6 campaign functions. You don't have to have 6 committees to be successful, but I would argue that you need to do those 6 things. So you need to raise a little bit of money to buy stamps, to hire a web designer, to hire a call center if you need one. The in-reach is under the roof. So we're talking about our employees, focusing on informing them and encouraging support. Outreach is outside into the community, both with individuals and groups. Communications, core and subordinate messages. Core message is one that everyone's going to hear. Subordinate would be a message more focused on a particular group. For example, parents of preschool children who haven't started school yet. Canvassing are the calls that are done or the door knocking that is done in the 2 or 3 months leading up to Election Day, trying to find yes voters and identifying those yes voters. And the get out the vote effort is typically in the last week of getting people in the door to cast a ballot. So again, the structure here is showing 6 committees. Here you're seeing the 6 functions. If you wanted to have in-reach and outreach be one committee, and canvassing and get out the vote being one committee, that would be fine as well, as long as you get those key functions done well. One of the ways to improve the effectiveness of a campaign committee is to also use a steering committee. Now, on the previous graphic, you had 15 people. You had your tri-chairs and you had 6 committees with co-chairs for each committee. Here you're looking at 6 people. And so what we're suggesting here with the steering committee is your 3 tri-chairs, superintendent or designee, a staff representative, and the school board chair or designee. So this is a small group, and this small group is going to meet and talk regularly, much more frequently than the full campaign committee, and they're essentially the generals, if you will, of the campaign. Edward Kennedy was quoted as saying, an effective political campaign is a bit like an army, large, well-trained, disciplined, with varying complex missions, but overseen by a tight chain of command. So this is essentially the tight chain of command. This group is going to be talking, meeting in parts of the campaign probably daily to make sure that things get done well, they get done on time, and to make decisions about what the campaign is actually going to do. This graphic reinforces this notion of this steering committee, which is the diamond in the middle. That's the small group, that's the generals, and they're connecting the advocacy campaign, the Vote Yes for Kids campaign, with the district informational campaign. They're connecting, they're coordinating, they're making sure that things get done correctly, and the district's work is coordinated with the campaign's work. I can give you a negative example of what happens when this isn't well done. There was a suburban district a number of years ago, and it was, I think, going for a $100 million bond referendum. And based on election history and the timing of the election, they were not on a general election. They were all by themselves, nothing on the ballot. And based on the demographics of the community and the size of the parent group, they wanted a small turnout. Now, to clarify that, they did not want a small turnout from parents. They wanted a small turnout overall. So, close to the end of the campaign, I got a phone call from the superintendent saying, we've got a problem. I said, what is it? They said, well, the communication committee from the Vote Yes group bought 5,000 lawn signs and last night pounded them all over the district at intersections, anywhere they thought a lot of people would see them. So think about that strategy. I said at the beginning, this district, based on its demographics and history, wanted a small turnout. Well, what is the effect of 5,000 lawn signs? I'm sure you're well aware that the effect is that would tend to increase turnout because it would be giving 5,000 reminders every day to vote. Then the superintendent went on to say, there's another problem. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, they didn't put the required disclaimer on the sign. So in this particular state, that the bottom of the sign was required to say, this sign was paid for by the Vote Yes for Kids Committee with the address and phone number of the finance chair of the committee, and they didn't put that on there, so it was an illegal sign. So this example from the battlefield of lost referenda, on one night, volunteers from the campaign put up 5,000 illegal signs, and the next night, after the sun went down, the volunteers went out and took the signs down. So that is an example of what happens when that diamond steering committee in the middle of this graphic is not working. When it's working well, the communication committee from the campaign would not have planned, paid for, and put up those lawn signs without the knowledge and approval of the steering committee. So it's very, very important, however you organize it, that is a strong function of the campaign. So some summary thoughts of what I went through. It's important when organizing a campaign that the plan be comprehensive, detailed, focused, plan the work, work the plan. I recommended earlier something in the neighborhood of 15 to 18 months. That's what that plan should look like, and be very, very clear about what needs to be done and who's going to be doing it, which gets to the command control, tasks and timelines, responsibilities, coordination, and use that engagement pyramid concept to involve people at all levels and encourage more people to get involved, and then key leaders to move from lower levels of involvement to higher levels of commitment. Successful campaigns require significant doses of time, talent, and treasure, and so we need to be prepared for that reality. Match all campaign functions with ideal task performers. I've given you the example earlier of raising money. You get the right people assigned to do that, you're going to get the money you need. Regular steering committee meetings to control, adjust, communicate, coordinate, to make sure that there's coordination between the campaign and between the campaign and the district. That example I gave you of the lawn signs is what happens when that's not done well. And execute the big three. It's very, very difficult to win a referendum unless your campaign does very, very good work in the canvassing, communications, and get out the vote. I hope the material I've gone through on organizing a campaign and roles and responsibilities is helpful, and certainly would invite you to contact Julie or me if you have questions or we can be of help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. Really appreciate it, and I hope everybody joins us for our final and fourth referendum webinar series. Thank you.